I discovered my husband was planning a divorce, so I moved my $600 million fortune. A week later, my name is Lorraine, and at 57 years old, I built a technology empire worth $600 million through decades of relentless work. My husband Richard and I celebrated 25 years of what I thought was a perfect marriage last spring. Then one Tuesday morning, I accidentally discovered files on his laptop revealing his plan to divorce me and claim half my fortune. What happened next changed everything. Before I tell you how I outmaneuvered the man who betrayed me after 25 years, let me know where you're watching from and hit that subscribe button if you want more stories about women who refuse to be victims. I met Richard when I was 32 and struggling to get my software company off the ground. He walked into a tech conference where I was pitching to potential investors, and unlike the others who seemed bored by my presentation, his eyes lit up with genuine interest. Richard was 34, then working as a marketing consultant with dark hair that always fell slightly across his forehead and confidence that filled any room he entered. Your algorithm could revolutionize how companies handle data security, he told me afterward, handing me his business card. Let me buy you coffee and tell you how to make these investors see what I see in your work. That coffee turned into dinner, which turned into a whirlwind romance. Richard understood my vision when most people thought I was just another hopeful tech entrepreneur who would burn out within a year. He helped me refine my pitch, introduced me to his network, and stood beside me through the nerve-wracking early days of SecureFlow Technologies. 6 months after we met during a late night at my tiny office surrounded by empty takeout containers and lines of code, Richard proposed. "We make an unstoppable team," he said, presenting a modest diamond ring. "You build the products, I help sell your vision. Together we could conquer Silicon Valley." I said yes without hesitation. We married in a small ceremony with just our closest friends present. Amanda, my college roommate, who had recently joined my company as financial director, stood as my maid of honor. James, our family attorney, who had helped with my initial business contracts, was Richard's best man. The early years were beautiful chaos. Richard continued his consulting work while I poured everything into my company. We lived in a small apartment in San Jose, saving every penny to reinvest in the business. Richard never complained when dinner was cold or when I worked through weekends. Instead, he brought me coffee, massaged my shoulders, and listened to my technical problems, even though the details were beyond his expertise. "Your brain is the sexiest thing about you," he would joke. Well, one of the sexiest things. Our big break came in my 5th year of business when a major bank adopted our security protocol. Suddenly, SecureFlow Technologies was on the map. More clients followed, and within 3 years, we moved from our small apartment to a beautiful house in Palo Alto. Richard left his consulting job to become my company's marketing director. While I focused on product development, he built our brand and public image. Together, we expanded from financial security into healthcare data protection, government contracts, and international markets. By our 10th anniversary, my company valuation hit $50 million. We celebrated by buying our dream property, a stunning 6-bedroom estate in Palo Alto with an infinity pool overlooking meticulously landscaped gardens. Richard surprised me with a second honeymoon to Bora Bora, where we spent 2 weeks disconnected from the business, reconnecting as a couple. "When I met you, I knew you were brilliant," Richard told me as we watched the sunset from our overwater bungalow. "But I never imagined we would build all this together. You amaze me every day, Lorraine." Those words meant everything to me, because while the world saw a successful businesswoman, Richard saw me, the girl from a middle-class Boston family who coded her first program on a second-hand computer at 12. He knew my insecurities, my drive, my dreams. At least I thought he did. The next 15 years brought exponential growth. SecureFlow Technologies went public, and our valuation skyrocketed. We expanded to offices in London, Singapore, and Sydney. I was featured in Fortune magazine as one of the most influential women in technology. Through it all, Richard remained my rock, or so I believed. We settled into a comfortable routine of luxury and purpose. Weekdays were dedicated to the company, weekends to enjoying our success. Richard developed a passion for collecting vintage wines and modern art. I took up tennis and philanthropic work, establishing a foundation to support women in STEM. We entertained frequently, becoming known for gatherings that brought together tech elites, politicians, and cultural influencers. Amanda remained my right hand at the company, now serving as CFO. James handled all our legal affairs, both business and personal. They became fixtures in our lives, joining us for holidays and vacations. Richard sometimes joked that they were the children we never had. Not having children was a mutual decision. We discussed it several times over the years, but always concluded that our company was our baby. I sometimes wondered if Richard regretted this choice, especially when I noticed how he doted on his nieces and nephews. But whenever I asked, he assured me he was perfectly content with our life. The first signs of trouble came subtly. About a year before our 25th anniversary, Richard began working later hours. He started taking weekend trips to scout locations for company events or meet potential clients. His phone became a permanent extension of his hand, and he would step away to take calls, speaking in hushed tones. "Just working on a surprise for our anniversary," he would say with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes when I questioned him. I believed him because I wanted to, because after 24 years together, trust was the foundation of our relationship, because the alternative was too painful to consider. Last spring, as our anniversary approached, I decided to plan something special. Richard had always handled our celebration arrangements, but this year I wanted to surprise him. I booked a month-long Mediterranean cruise on a private yacht arranged for Amanda to manage the company in my absence, and began shopping for the perfect gift, a rare vintage Patek Philippe watch Richard had admired at an auction years ago. The day I finalized the cruise booking, Richard came home with flowers and my favorite champagne. "To us," he toasted, "and to 25 more years of success." I clinked my glass against his, completely unaware that in his private email he had already scheduled his first consultation with one of California's top divorce attorneys. It was a Tuesday morning in April, just 3 weeks before our anniversary. Richard had been particularly attentive the night before, bringing home dinner from my favorite restaurant and suggesting we open a bottle from his prized wine collection. We made love for the first time in months, and I fell asleep feeling reconnected to my husband, optimistic about our future. I woke to find Richard already dressed for work, rushing through breakfast. "Emergency meeting with the European distribution team," he explained, kissing my forehead. "Might be a late one tonight." I nodded sleepily, watching him gather his things. In his haste, he left his laptop on the kitchen counter, something he never did. Richard was meticulous about his devices, always password protected and secured. But that morning, the screen was still unlocked, open to his email. I wasn't looking to invade his privacy. I was simply going to close the laptop when a calendar notification popped up. "Follow up with Westfield. Divorce strategy 2 p.m. Westfield." I recognized the name immediately. Gregory Westfield was known as the Wealth Divider, a notorious divorce attorney who specialized in high net worth separations, particularly in securing maximum settlements from wealthy spouses. My hand froze above the keyboard. This had to be a mistake. Perhaps it was related to a friend's divorce. Richard occasionally provided marketing advice to his friends in personal matters. That had to be it. But something cold and heavy settled in my stomach as I moved the cursor to close the window. Another email caught my eye. Subject line, "Asset inventory complete." With trembling fingers, I clicked. The email was brief. "Richard, attached is the comprehensive inventory of joint and separate assets as requested. Based on California community property laws, we have highlighted the items with strongest potential claims. Next steps will be discussed at our appointment. Discretion remains paramount until filing date." Jug attached was a spreadsheet I opened to find a meticulous catalog of everything we owned. the house vacation properties art collection investment accounts, and most prominently, my company holdings with detailed valuation figures. Next to each item were notes like established pre-marriage, challenge possible, or growth during marriage, strong community property claim. My chest tightened as I scrolled through the document, each entry feeling like another betrayal. This was not casual advice for a friend. This was a strategic plan to claim half of everything I had built. With growing dread, I searched Richard's email using keywords like divorce and settlement. Dozens of exchanges appeared dating back nearly 8 months. I discovered that Richard had been methodically preparing for divorce, gathering financial records, documenting his contributions to my business success, and strategizing the optimal timing for maximum financial gain. The longer we wait, the more valuable her company becomes, Westfield wrote in one email. However, we must file before she has any suspicion that might lead her to protect assets. I found a folder labeled RK Personal, hidden within his cloud storage. Inside were photographs. Richard with a woman I didn't recognize as. She was younger, perhaps mid-30s, with the toned physique of someone who spent considerable time on fitness. In some photos, they were dining in restaurants I didn't recognize. In others, they were more intimate, embracing on what appeared to be a hotel balcony. The final piece fell into place when I found hotel reservations and flight itineraries. Those business trips had been rendezvous with this woman, Catherine Roberts, according to the reservation details. A quick social media search revealed she was a 34-year-old yoga instructor who owned a studio in San Francisco. Richard had been taking private lessons for over a year. The planned filing date was highlighted in multiple documents. May 15th, just after our 25th anniversary cruise, I had secretly booked. According to their emails, Richard intended to use the trip to convince me to transfer certain assets as an anniversary gift before filing immediately upon our return. I sat at the kitchen counter for hours, scrolling through evidence of my husband's betrayal, feeling my world collapse around me. 25 years of marriage. 25 years of what I thought was partnership, respect, and love. All while he calculated how to take half of everything I had built. Tears blurred my vision as I forwarded key emails to my personal account and took screenshots of the most damning evidence. Then I carefully returned everything to its original state, closed the laptop, and placed it exactly where Richard had left it. In the master bathroom, I splashed cold water on my face and stared at my reflection. The woman looking back appeared suddenly older, the fine lines around her eyes deepened by this new knowledge. I took several deep breaths, trying to steady myself. My initial instinct was to confront Richard immediately, to scream and demand explanations, to ask when love had turned to calculation, to question how many of his kisses had been investments toward a future payday. But as the initial shock subsided, another emotion surfaced. A cold, clear determination. Richard had spent months planning how to blindside me legally. He and his attorney had strategized how to claim half of the company I had poured my life into building. They had calculated the perfect moment to strike when I would be most vulnerable and unprepared. I reached for my phone, then stopped. If Richard had been planning this meticulously, he might be monitoring my calls or messages. Instead, I sent a text that would appear completely innocent, thinking of having Amanda and James over for dinner this week. Miss our game nights. Then I made a decision that would change everything. I wouldn't confront him. Not yet. First, I would protect what I'd spent my life building. The moment Richard's car disappeared down our driveway, I called Amanda. My voice must have betrayed my distress because she immediately asked what was wrong. I need to see you and James right away, I said, keeping my voice steady with effort. Not at the office, not at my house, somewhere private. Lorraine, you're scaring me, Amanda replied. Are you okay? No, I admitted. But I will be. Can you pick up James and meet me at the Garden House in an hour? The Garden House was a small secluded property I owned in Woodside, about 20 minutes from Palo Alto. Richard had forgotten about it years ago. We purchased it as an investment early in our marriage and had kept it as a potential guest house, though we rarely used it. "We'll be there," Amanda promised without further questions. I packed a small bag with essentials, then drove to the garden house, taking a circuitous route and checking repeatedly to ensure I wasn't followed. Paranoia had never been my nature, but discovering my husband's betrayal had shattered my sense of security. Amanda and James arrived together, their faces etched with concern. Amanda, practical and direct with her trademark silver pixie cut and sharp blue eyes that missed nothing in financial statements or human behavior. James, tall and distinguished with salt and pepper hair and the calm demeanor that had guided us through countless legal situations over 20 years. "What's happened?" James asked as we settled in the dusty living room. I took a deep breath and began recounting my discovery. Their expressions shifted from concern to shock to outrage as I showed them the screenshots and forwarded emails. "That calculating bastard," Amanda whispered, her normally composed face flushed with anger. 25 years, and this is how he repays your loyalty." James remained quiet longer, reviewing the evidence with his attorney's precision. "He's been thorough," he finally said. "Westfield is one of the best, most aggressive divorce attorneys in California. Richard has clearly been planning this for months." "There's more," I said, my voice breaking slightly. "Amanda, remember when Richard started showing more interest in our quarterly financials, asking detailed questions about our international holdings and intellectual property valuations?" Amanda's eyes widened. "I thought he was finally taking a genuine interest in the financial side of the business. He said he wanted to understand it better to support your vision." "He was gathering information," James concluded grimly, "building his case for how integral he's been to the company's success. Can he really claim half my company?" I asked the question that had been burning inside me since reading those emails. James sighed, removing his glasses to rub the bridge of his nose. "California is a community property state. Any wealth accumulated during the marriage is generally considered jointly owned regardless of whose name is on it. Since you built Secure Flow during your marriage, and Richard has been employed there in an executive capacity, he could have a claim." I finished feeling ill. "A significant one," James confirmed, "especially with Westfield representing him. They'll argue that your success was a joint effort, that his marketing strategies and business connections were crucial to the company's growth. But that's not entirely true," Amanda interjected. "Yes, Richard contributed, but Lorraine, you're the genius behind the technology, the patents, the innovation. The company exists because of your vision and technical expertise. Unfortunately, courts don't always make those distinctions in divorce proceedings," James explained. "They look at the marital enterprise as a whole. Richard has been strategically documenting his contributions and could potentially claim up to half of your $600 million company." The room fell silent as the full weight of my situation sank in. Everything I had built was at risk, not just my wealth, but my life's work. "So what do we do?" I finally asked, straightening my shoulders. "First, we need to understand exactly what we're protecting," Amanda said, switching to her CFO mode. "Let me break down your current asset structure." She grabbed a notepad and began outlining my financial situation. The majority of my wealth was tied to my 60% ownership of Secure Flow Technologies, currently valued at around $600 million. The remaining 40% was held by a combination of early investors and employees with stock options. Beyond the company, I had approximately $40 million in personal investments. Our Palo Alto estate worth $18 million, vacation properties in Lake Tahoe and Hawaii worth another $12 million, combined retirement accounts, art collections, and various other assets. "The most vulnerable asset is clearly your company's stock," James noted. "Richard's claim to half of your shares would effectively give him control of Secure Flow." "That cannot happen," I stated firmly. "I will not let the company I built from nothing be controlled by the man who betrayed me." "There may be a way to protect your assets," James said carefully, "but we need to act quickly and discreetly. Richard plans to file in approximately 3 weeks." Whatever we do must be completed before then, and it must be legally defensible. I'm listening, I said. James outlined a three-phase plan. Phase 1 would involve immediately securing my liquid assets by transferring them to new accounts. Phase 2 would focus on restructuring my company ownership through a series of legal entities that would make it more difficult for Richard to claim a significant portion. Phase 3 would address our physical properties and collections. Is this legal? I asked, unwilling to stoop to Richard's level of deception. Everything I'm suggesting is legal, James assured me. Aggressive but legal. We're not hiding assets. We're restructuring them in a way that better protects your interests. You have every right to manage your assets as you see fit until a divorce is filed. What about Richard? Amanda asked. When will he realize what's happening? He can't know until everything is in place, I decided despite the twisting in my stomach. I'll need to continue as if nothing has changed. The thought of returning home to smile at Richard, to share meals and a bed with him while knowing what he planned, made me physically ill. But the alternative, losing control of my company to the man who had calculated the value of our marriage in dollars, was unthinkable. I'll do whatever it takes, I said, my resolve hardening. Tell me exactly what I need to do. As Amanda and James began outlining the specific steps of our counter strategy, I felt a strange mixture of grief and determination. The life I had known was over. The man I had loved for 25 years was a stranger to me now, but I would not be his victim. That evening I returned home and greeted Richard with a kiss, asking about his day. He lied smoothly about his business meeting, while I pretended not to know that he had spent 2 hours with a divorce attorney planning my financial demise. The performance had begun. For the next 3 weeks, I would live a double life, devoted wife by night and woman fighting for her financial survival by day. Dawn broke the next morning with painful clarity. I had barely slept lying beside Richard and listening to his steady breathing, wondering how many nights he had lain awake planning his betrayal. Now, watching the California sun illuminate our bedroom, I steeled myself for what needed to be done. Richard kissed me goodbye as usual, mentioning another late meeting. I smiled and wished him a productive day, the perfect picture of a supportive wife. The moment his car disappeared down our driveway, I sprang into action. First came the liquid assets. Following James's instructions, I traveled to 5 different banks across Silicon Valley. At each one, I transferred substantial sums from our joint accounts to newly established ones in my name only. California law permitted this. As a married person, I had every right to move funds from joint accounts until divorce proceedings began. By noon, I had secured $28 million. Phase 1 complete. I texted Amanda using our newly established secure messaging system. Next came the most complex part, restructuring my company ownership. Amanda had arranged an emergency board meeting, citing succession planning discussions as the agenda. Our board members had known me for years and trusted my leadership implicitly. As SecureFlow continues to grow internationally, I explained during the meeting, we need to optimize our corporate structure for both tax efficiency and long-term stability. No one questioned when I proposed creating a tiered ownership structure that would essentially place my shares into a carefully constructed series of entities. On paper, I was diluting my direct ownership, but in reality, I was securing it against potential external claims. The board approved unanimously. James had assembled a team of corporate attorneys who worked through the night drafting the necessary documentation. By the following afternoon, my 60% ownership had been restructured into a complex arrangement that would make it extraordinarily difficult for Richard to claim half. Even if he's awarded a portion in divorce proceedings, James explained, as we reviewed the new structure, he'll receive significantly less control than he's anticipating, and it would come with substantial restrictions. Phase 3 involved our physical assets. I created an irrevocable trust with Amanda and my sister Grace as trustees, then transferred ownership of our vacation properties to this entity. The Palo Alto house remained in our joint names. Attempting to transfer it would certainly alert Richard, but I documented every dollar I had personally contributed to its purchase and improvements. For our art collection, I arranged a traveling exhibition through a museum where I served on the board. Legally, the artwork remained our property, but physically, it would be unavailable and difficult to appraise during divorce proceedings. Throughout this whirlwind of activity, I maintained my facade at home. Each night I prepared or ordered Richard's favorite meals. I asked about his day and shared meaningless details about mine. I even initiated intimacy one evening, fighting back revulsion as he held me afterward, probably thinking how soon he would be doing the same with Catherine. The strain was becoming unbearable. On the fifth day, Richard almost discovered me on a video call with James when he returned home unexpectedly. "Who were you talking to?" he asked, noticing how quickly I closed my laptop. "Amanda," I lied smoothly. "We're finalizing the quarterly projections." Richard nodded, but I caught a flicker of suspicion in his eyes. Later that evening, I noticed him glancing at my phone when a message arrived. "You've been working unusual hours this week," he commented casually over dinner. "Anything significant happening at the company?" "Just the usual end-of-quarter rush," I replied, meeting his gaze steadily. "You know how it gets." That night, I discovered him checking my laptop browser history after he thought I was asleep. My paranoia hadn't been unwarranted after all. He was monitoring me. Perhaps he sensed something had changed, or maybe this surveillance had been ongoing throughout his planning. I texted Amanda the next morning, "Need to accelerate timeline. Are becoming suspicious." We worked feverishly over the next 2 days to complete our protective measures. The final piece involved international assets, patents, and subsidiaries in Europe and Asia that represented a substantial portion of SecureFlow's value. By creating a licensing structure between our domestic and international entities, we established a legal framework that would preserve my control regardless of potential domestic challenges. 7 days after discovering Richard's betrayal, I received confirmation that all planned protections were in place. My company structure had been reorganized, my liquid assets secured, and my most valuable personal property protected as much as legally possible. That evening, I returned home emotionally exhausted, but with a sense of grim accomplishment. I had done everything possible to protect what was rightfully mine. Now, I could either wait for Richard to make his move or confront him with what I knew. The decision was made for me when I pulled into our driveway and saw an unfamiliar car parked near our front door. Inside the house, I found Richard sitting tensely in our living room, a manila envelope on the coffee table before him. "Lorraine," he said, his voice unnaturally controlled, "we need to talk." I remember how surreal that moment felt, standing in our tastefully decorated living room with 25 years of memories surrounding us, looking at the stranger my husband had become. The manila envelope on the coffee table seemed to pulse with destructive energy. "What's that?" I asked, though I already knew. Richard's jaw tightened. "I filed for divorce." Even though I'd been expecting it, the word still hit like a physical blow. He had filed earlier than planned, a week before his originally scheduled date, nearly 2 weeks before our anniversary. My asset protection measures must have triggered some alarm. "I see," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "Why, we've grown apart," he recited as if reading from a script. "I need to find myself again. This isn't about you, it's about—" "Stop," I interrupted. "At least have the decency not to insult my intelligence with cliches." His eyes narrowed slightly. "I've tried to be fair about this. My attorney recommended Gregory Westfield. I finished for him. Yes, I know all about your consultations with him." Surprise flickered across his face before he could mask it. "How did you know that you've been planning this for months? That you've been documenting every aspect of our finances? That you intend to claim half my company?" I crossed the room and poured myself a glass of water, needing something to do with my hands. "Or perhaps you're wondering how I know about Catherine." The color drained from Richard's face. "You've been spying on me." I laughed without humor. "Projecting much, Richard. You left your laptop open last week. I saw everything. Your emails, your asset inventories, your strategy sessions with Westfield, your plans to wait until after our anniversary trip before blindsiding me. It wasn't like that, he protested weakly. Then what was it like? I demanded, my composure finally cracking. Explain to me how my husband of 25 years meticulously planned to take half of everything I've built while sleeping with a yoga instructor. The front doorbell rang, interrupting Richard's response. He glanced nervously toward the entrance. That would be the rest of our dinner party. Dinner party? I repeated incredulously. You filed for divorce and planned a dinner party on the same day. I thought it would be less awkward to have friends here when I gave you the papers, he admitted. I didn't expect you to already know. The calculated cruelty of it took my breath away. He had invited witnesses to my humiliation, people who would watch as I received divorce papers during what I thought was a normal social evening. Before I could respond, our housekeeper had opened the door and voices filled the foyer. Our friends David and Sarah Peterson, along with Brian and Jennifer Campbell, all longtime social acquaintances who moved in our wealthy Silicon Valley circles. Richard had chosen couples who were more his friends than mine. I will not perform for an audience, I hissed at Richard before plastering on a social smile and greeting our guests. What followed was the most excruciating dinner party of my life. Richard played the role of charming host perfectly while I struggled to maintain basic civility. Our guests, sensing the tension but unaware of its cause, made increasingly desperate attempts at conversation. Richard was just telling us about your anniversary plans next month, Jennifer said brightly over dessert. A Mediterranean cruise sounds divine. I looked directly at Richard. Actually, those plans have changed, significantly. An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. Richard cleared his throat. Perhaps we should open another bottle of wine. As he stood to retrieve it, a young man in a suit appeared in our dining room doorway, escorted by our confused housekeeper. I'm sorry to interrupt, the stranger said. I'm looking for Richard Keller. Richard turned, wine bottle in hand. That's me? I'm here to serve you with documents, the young man stated professionally, extending a thick envelope. The dinner party guests froze in collective shock. Richard stood motionless, the color draining from his face. What is this? He asked hoarsely, making no move to take the envelope. Counter filing for divorce, sir, plus preliminary injunctions regarding corporate assets of Secure Flow Technologies. When Richard still didn't take the envelope, the process server placed it on our dining table and nodded politely. You've been served. Have a good evening. After he left, silence engulfed the room. Our guests stared at their plates, desperately uncomfortable. Perhaps we should go, David finally suggested, standing abruptly. Within minutes, our home emptied of guests, leaving Richard and me alone with the 2 divorce filings between us. What did you do? Richard demanded once we were alone, tearing open the envelope from my attorney. I watched calmly as he scanned the documents, his expression shifting from confusion to disbelief to alarm. What did you do? He repeated, his voice rising. These injunctions, they're freezing nearly everything. I protected what's mine, I stated simply. The company's shares. They're not even in your name anymore. The Tahoe house is in a trust. The art collection is where... His voice rose with each discovery. You've hidden our assets. I've restructured my assets, I corrected. Everything is declared in those filings. Nothing is hidden, just protected. Richard sank into a chair, still clutching the papers. You knew. You've known for days. A week, I confirmed. Exactly 1 week since you left your laptop open. 7 days that changed everything. This won't stand, he threatened, regaining some composure. Westfield will tear these arrangements apart. Courts don't look kindly on last-minute asset transfers before divorce. Every single action I took was legal, I replied calmly. James made certain of that. And unlike you, I didn't spend months plotting in secret. I simply responded to a clear threat to my life's work. Richard's initial shock was transitioning to calculation. I could see it in his eyes as he reassessed his position. We can still resolve this reasonably, he offered, his tone softening. This aggressive approach will just cost us both in legal fees. We built a life together, Lorraine. Surely we can find a fair division. Fair, I repeated incredulously. Was it fair when you mapped out how to claim half my company? Was it fair when you scheduled our anniversary trip with divorce papers waiting for our return? Was it fair when you spent weekends with Catherine while I worked to grow the company you planned to take from me? Catherine is not important, Richard said dismissively. She was just— Don't, I cut him off. Don't you dare diminish your betrayal by suggesting she meant nothing. You've betrayed me twice over, as a husband and as a business partner. At least own your decisions. The next morning, Richard moved into our guest house. The day after that, we had our first court hearing for temporary orders regarding living arrangements and preliminary financial matters. Richard arrived with Westfield confident they would begin dismantling my protective measures immediately. Instead, they encountered my legal team armed with documentation of Richard's long-planned divorce strategy. The judge, an experienced woman in her 60s, was visibly unimpressed by Westfield's arguments given the evidence of Richard's pre-filing conduct. The temporary orders largely maintained the status quo with respect to my business interests while allowing Richard access to reasonable living expenses from our joint accounts. As we left the courtroom, I watched Richard huddled with Westfield, their expressions grim. For the first time, I saw fear in my husband's eyes as he realized his carefully laid plans were unraveling. That evening, Richard appeared at the main house, his demeanor completely transformed. Gone was the calculated aggression, replaced by something approaching panic. "We need to talk," he said urgently. "This has gone too far already." "I agree," I replied coolly. "You should have thought of that before spending 8 months planning to take my company." "Lorraine, please," he implored. "I made a terrible mistake. I got greedy and stupid, but 25 years has to count for something." I studied the man I had loved for half my life, searching for any glimpse of the person I thought I knew. All I saw was someone frightened of losing the financial windfall he had counted on. "You're right about one thing," I told him. 25 years does count for something. It counts toward how thoroughly I'm going to ensure you don't profit from betraying me. The weeks that followed my counter-filing transformed into a high-stakes legal battle that drew unwanted attention from both the business community and society pages. Richard's legal team, led by the infamous Gregory Westfield, launched an aggressive campaign accusing me of fraudulent asset transfers and hiding marital property. Our first major court hearing drew a small crowd of reporters. Tech industry divorces involving hundreds of millions in assets weren't common even in wealthy Silicon Valley. I arrived with James and 2 additional attorneys from his firm, all of us projecting calm confidence despite my inner turmoil. Richard and Westfield arrived moments later, both wearing expressions of righteous indignation that seemed rehearsed. Westfield immediately approached the judge with accusations. "Your Honor, this case presents a clear example of calculated financial deception," he began dramatically. "In the days immediately preceding our filing, Mrs. Keller orchestrated a massive restructuring of marital assets with the obvious intent to deprive my client of his rightful share." James rose calmly in response. "Your Honor, we have evidence demonstrating that Mr. Keller had been planning this divorce for approximately 8 months, during which time he methodically gathered financial information while actively misleading Mrs. Keller about his intentions." The judge, an experienced jurist named Judge Eleanor Rivera, frowned slightly. "These are serious allegations on both sides. I'll need to see this evidence." What followed was a methodical presentation that exposed Richard's months of planning. James presented the emails between Richard and Westfield, the detailed asset inventory they had compiled, and evidence of Richard's relationship with Catherine. "As these exhibits clearly show," James concluded, "Mrs. Keller's actions were responsive to Mr. Keller's long-planned strategy to claim assets he had no part in building. Her restructuring was not concealment but protection against a documented attempt to seize control of her life's work. Judge Rivera reviewed the evidence carefully, her expression growing increasingly stern. Finally, she looked directly at Westfield. Counselor, were you aware of the extent of your client's pre-filing activities when you made allegations of fraud against Mrs. Keller? Westfield shifted uncomfortably. Your Honor, my client's consultations with me were preparatory in nature, which is standard practice. That doesn't answer my question, Judge Rivera interrupted sharply. Did you know that while accusing Mrs. Keller of deception, your client had been documenting her assets for 8 months while actively misleading her about his intentions? The courtroom fell silent. I glanced at Richard, who had sunk slightly in his seat, his confident facade crumbling. The court takes a dim view of such tactics. Judge Rivera continued. The preliminary injunctions regarding secure flow technologies will remain in place until trial. Mr. Keller's request for temporary control of corporate assets is denied. It was our first significant victory, but merely the beginning of a protracted legal battle. Richard, realizing his initial strategy had failed, shifted to a new approach, claiming he had been instrumental to my company's success and deserved substantial compensation for his contributions. This led to exhaustive discovery proceedings, where Richard's legal team demanded years of corporate records, emails, and meeting minutes attempting to document his influence on key business decisions. The process was invasive and exhausting, forcing me to divide my attention between running my company and defending my right to keep it. The situation escalated further when Westfield subpoenaed Catherine as a witness. I couldn't imagine what testimony she could offer relevant to our financial disputes until James explained their likely strategy. They're going to claim you were emotionally distant and career-obsessed, he theorized. That Richard sought comfort elsewhere only after years of neglect while still contributing significantly to the business. It's a sympathy play combined with reinforcing his business contributions. Their plan backfired spectacularly. Catherine, apparently believing she would soon share in Richard's expected windfall, had been promised a lavish lifestyle. When questioned under oath about her relationship with Richard, she revealed damaging details. Richard told me that once the divorce was final, we would travel the world on their yacht, she testified. He said his wife was so obsessed with her company that she wouldn't even notice half the assets were gone until it was too late. Catherine further testified that Richard had calculated the timing of his filing specifically to maximize his financial gain. He said we just needed to wait for the company to close one more major government contract before filing. He called it his retirement plan. By the time Catherine finished her testimony, Richard's credibility was shattered. Judge Rivera made little effort to hide her disgust at the calculated nature of his actions. The media coverage that followed was brutal. Business journals that had once featured glowing profiles of us as a power couple now ran headlines like Tech Titan fends off husband's asset grab and Silicon Valley's $600 million divorce battle exposes calculated betrayal. Our social circle fragmented as friends felt compelled to choose sides. Most of Richard's allies distanced themselves after Catherine's testimony revealed the extent of his calculated betrayal. My closest friends rallied around me, with Amanda becoming both my emotional support and public defender in business circles. 8 weeks into the divorce proceedings, Richard's carefully constructed legal strategy was crumbling. Westfield's aggressive tactics had antagonized Judge Rivera, and their evidence of Richard's business contributions had been systematically dismantled by my legal team. The final blow came when Westfield himself withdrew from the case, citing professional differences with his client. Industry gossip suggested he'd discovered Richard had withheld information about the extent of his pre-divorce planning, potentially exposing Westfield to professional ethics complaints. Richard appeared at our Palo Alto house the following evening, looking deflated and desperate. He had lost weight, and the confident swagger that had once defined him was gone. "Can we talk?" he asked when I answered the door. "Without lawyers, without accusations, just us." Against my better judgment, I let him in. We sat in the living room, where we had once shared so many happy evenings, now feeling like a museum to a life that no longer existed. I've made a terrible mistake, Richard began, his voice hoarse. I got greedy. I convinced myself I deserved more than I did, and I've lost everything that actually mattered in the process. Why, I asked the question that had haunted me for months. We had a good life. We had everything we could want. Why risk it all? Why betray me so completely? Richard stared at his hands for a long moment. I felt invisible, he finally said. You were the brilliant one, the visionary. I was just the husband, the marketing guy. When Catherine came along, she looked at me like I was the successful one, the powerful one. So you decided to take half my company. I couldn't keep the bitterness from my voice. It started small, he admitted, just gathering information, understanding our finances better. Then Westfield started painting pictures of what I could claim. The numbers got bigger, the strategy more detailed. It became a game, a challenge. By the time I realized what I was risking, I was too committed to stop. I studied the man I had once loved beyond reason, searching for any remnant of the person who had supported my dreams in those early days. I want to settle, Richard said abruptly. No more court battles, no more public spectacle. I'll accept whatever you think is fair. For the first time since discovering his betrayal, I felt a flicker of pity for him. He had gambled everything on a scheme that had failed spectacularly, leaving him with nothing but regrets. I'll have James draft a settlement agreement, I said finally. It will be fair, more than fair, given what you've done, but I won't be vindictive. Richard nodded, relief visible in his expression. Thank you, he said quietly. For whatever it's worth, I am truly sorry. As he left our home for what would be one of the final times, I realized that despite everything, a chapter of my life was ending. The pain and betrayal would always be part of my story, but they wouldn't define my future. The morning I signed my divorce settlement was crisp and clear, the kind of perfect California day that had once filled me with optimism. I arrived at James's office early, taking a moment to collect my thoughts before the meeting that would officially end my 25-year marriage. The settlement terms were straightforward. Richard would receive $10 million, a generous amount by normal standards, but far less than the hundreds of millions he had initially sought. He would keep his personal vehicle, clothing, and some family heirlooms that had come from his side. Everything else, the company, the properties, the investments, remained mine. He had accepted these terms without protest, perhaps understanding it was the best outcome he could hope for, given how thoroughly his plans had been exposed. More likely, he simply wanted the humiliating ordeal to end. Richard arrived precisely at the scheduled time, accompanied by his new attorney, a subdued older man who specialized in settlement negotiations rather than aggressive litigation. The contrast with Westfield's earlier bombastic approach was striking. We exchanged minimal pleasantries, then sat on opposite sides of James's conference table, reviewing the documents before us. I noticed Richard looked older, the stress of the past months evident in the new lines around his eyes and the gray that had overtaken much of his once dark hair. Before we sign, Richard said hesitantly, I want to say something. He looked directly at me for the first time that day. I know words are inadequate for what I did, but I am truly sorry, Lorraine. Not just for getting caught, but for betraying what we had. You deserved better. I studied him for a moment, searching for signs of manipulation or calculation, but found only resignation and regret. Thank you for that, I replied simply, then turned back to the documents. We signed in silence, the scratching of pens on paper, the only sound in the room. With each signature, I felt a weight lifting, not just the burden of the legal battle, but the heavier emotional load I had carried since discovering his betrayal. It's done, James announced as we signed the final page. I'll file these with the court today. Your divorce will be final in 6 months, but all financial matters are resolved as of now. Richard stood, extending his hand first to James, and then after a moment's hesitation to me. I accepted it briefly, marking the final professional transaction between us. Goodbye, Lorraine, he said quietly. I truly wish you the best. As he walked out of the office, I felt an unexpected sense of closure. The man who left was not the partner I had loved for 25 years, or the betrayer who had plotted against me. He was simply a chapter of my life that had ended. In the weeks that followed, I began the process of truly rebuilding. The first task was selling our Palo Alto estate, the beautiful home that now held too many painful memories. I hired a discreet real estate agent who specialized in high-value properties and placed most of our shared belongings in storage for eventual auction. The house sold quickly to a young tech CEO and his family. Watching them tour the property, their children running excitedly through rooms that Richard and I had once filled with dinner parties and business meetings, brought a bittersweet realization that life continues, spaces are reimagined, and nothing remains static. I purchased a sleek modern condominium in San Francisco overlooking the bay. The minimalist design and panoramic views represented everything my new life would be, uncluttered, forward-looking, and with a broader perspective than before. Richard Frey, I learned through mutual acquaintances, had moved in with Catherine briefly before the relationship imploded. The promised luxury lifestyle had evaporated with his reduced settlement, and Catherine's interest apparently diminished proportionally. He eventually relocated to Arizona, where he launched a modest marketing consultancy catering to small businesses. My company continued to thrive after a period of inevitable disruption. The divorce had raised questions among some clients and investors, but Amanda had masterfully managed these concerns, emphasizing that the restructuring had actually strengthened our corporate governance. The company is more resilient than ever, she assured nervous board members, and Lorraine is more focused and determined than I've seen her in years. She wasn't wrong. Free from the distractions of a failing marriage and the exhaustion of maintaining appearances, I found renewed creative energy. Within 6 months of the settlement, Secure Flow Technologies launched a revolutionary new security protocol that was quickly adopted by the major financial institutions worldwide. My personal healing took longer. I began seeing Dr. Elaine Matthews, a therapist specializing in betrayal trauma, who helped me process the complex emotions of ending a long-term relationship under such painful circumstances. You're grieving multiple losses, she explained during one session. Not just the end of your marriage, but the loss of your shared history and the future you imagined together. You're also grieving the person you thought Richard was. That perspective helped me separate my anger at Richard's betrayal from the genuine love we had shared in earlier years. Those memories weren't invalidated by how things ended. They were simply part of a completed chapter. I reconnected with family members I had neglected during the intense years of building my company and marriage. My sister Grace, who had served as a trustee during my asset protection maneuvers, became a regular presence in my life again. Her straightforward wisdom and unfailing loyalty helped ground me during difficult moments. You know what amazes me, she said during a weekend visit to my new home. Not that you protected your assets or won your case, but that throughout all of this you never lost your compassion. You had every right to destroy Richard completely, but you chose to be fair. Destroying him wouldn't have healed me, I replied, realizing the truth of it as I spoke. Nothing I took from him could restore what I lost. Gradually, I began rebuilding a social life independent of the couple's activities that had defined my married years. Amanda remained my closest friend, but I also formed new connections through a women's business leadership group and philanthropy work. At a fundraising gala for women in STEM education, I met Thomas Harrington, the founder of an educational technology company and a widower in his early 60s. Our conversation about incorporating security protocols into educational software evolved into dinner the following week, and eventually into a comfortable companionship that progressed at a deliberate pace. Unlike Richard, Thomas had built his own success and had no interest in mine except as a fellow entrepreneur. His respect for my work and boundaries was refreshing, though I proceeded cautiously, my trust now a precious commodity not easily granted. I'm not looking to rush anything, he told me after we had been dating for several months. We both have full lives and complex histories. I'm simply enjoying getting to know you. This measured approach allowed me to gradually lower the protective walls I had built. While I had no illusions about recapturing the uncomplicated trust of my younger years, I discovered that a more mature relationship, built on mutual respect, clear communication, and established boundaries, offered its own rewards. 18 months after signing my divorce settlement, I stood on the balcony of my San Francisco condominium, watching the sunset paint the bay in brilliant oranges and purples. My phone buzzed with a message from Amanda. Our latest government contract had been approved, potentially adding another $100 million to the company's valuation. I smiled at the news, but didn't feel the surge of validation I might have expected. The numbers that had once seemed so crucial, both in building my company and in protecting it from Richard, now felt like just one measure of success among many. The true victory wasn't in keeping my $600 million fortune, though I was grateful for the security and opportunities it provided. The real triumph was in refusing to be defined by betrayal, in rebuilding a life aligned with my values, and in finding the strength to remain open to connection despite profound disappointment. The path from discovery to resolution had been painful, but standing there in the fading light, I recognized that protecting my assets had ultimately been about something more fundamental than money. It had been about protecting my autonomy, my self-respect, and my right to determine my own future. For any woman watching this who finds herself in a similar situation, discovering deception, where there should be loyalty calculation, where there should be love, remember this. Your worth isn't measured by what others try to take from you. Your resilience is more valuable than any asset. And while legal protection is essential, the most important thing to safeguard is your belief in your own strength. I protected my $600 million fortune from a husband who spent months plotting to take it. But in the process, I discovered something far more valuable: the knowledge that no matter what is taken from you, no one can diminish your capacity to rebuild, reclaim, and ultimately thrive. Have you ever had to protect yourself from someone you trusted? How did you find the strength to move forward? Share your story in the comments below. And if this resonated with you, please hit that subscribe button and like this video. Your support helps me continue sharing stories of resilience and renewal. Thank you for listening, and remember, your greatest asset will always be your courage to begin again.